You're just going to give them like a 2-minute. Yours, that one I'll do. How are we doing? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm giving you the 2-minute warning. So if you could take your seats, please, we'll get started in 2 minutes. Thanks.
For the oil seat?
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
So we don't need to play with the mics at all. He's going to
Okay.
control the volume.
Okay, perfect. There we go. Yep. All right. Oh, no. Maybe I'll just shout. Okay, there we go. If everyone could please take your seats, that would be great. We're running a tight ship here, so thank you for all coming, and we'll give the candidates as much time as we can tonight. My name is John Cameron from the Balmy Beach Residents Association, and along with Beach Metro and the Beach Interfaith Group, we're happy to welcome you here this evening to Kingston Road United Church. Before I get started, I wanted to just go over a few ground rules. Tonight we've had all the questions submitted ahead of time by beach readers, community groups, etc. And we're very fortunate to have City News' Alan Carter and beach resident back with us this evening. So everyone give a warm welcome to Alan Carter. Thank goodness Alan is here, or you would have been stuck with me for the next hour and a half, so I assure you, you're in good hands. Also, a few things. We're in a church. Please be respectful. We thank Kingston Road United for welcoming us here this evening. And lastly, it takes a lot of courage to put your name on a ballot and voice your opinions in front of others. So I want to give a round of applause, please, to our candidates this evening as well. And Alan will have them introduce themselves in a moment, but the respect you just gave with your applause, I ask you to keep throughout the evening and be respectful in your responses to their answers to our questions. Okay, lastly, a healthy democracy only occurs when a media keeps it in check for us. And we're very fortunate to have that local media here in the Beach with the Beach Metro. So I want to thank them for the role they play. And many communities across Canada have lost their local voices, and so it's a real treat to have them. So I encourage you to give how you can to the Beach Metro, whether that be as an advertiser, a loyal reader, a door delivery paper person, or becoming a member on their website at beachmetro.com. So without further ado, we've got an hour and a half with our candidates and Alan, so enjoy yourselves this evening. Please behave, and over to you, Alan.
Thank you so much, John. Yes, please do behave. Yes, no, I think the key is we behave right up from the beginning. So this evening is about an education, about learning about different voters, or different candidates and their platforms. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you. We're gonna continue on. This is, democracy is not always easy. It can be messy sometimes. So thank you for your patience, and thank you so much for joining us again tonight. We have had just an enormous amount of interest, obviously, in this election and also in this event tonight, with a number of questions being submitted to the Beach Metro, and thank you again to the Beach Metro. I echo John's comments about the paper and how important it is to this community. And so what I'm going to be doing tonight is I'll be picking through some of those questions that have been put in, and many of them are on the same topic. So what I have done is I'm going to amalgamate a number of them into single questions and kind of try and get at larger issues that I think that many of you have been expressing. So you may hear your question in a form, you may not hear your name, you may not hear it in particular in the style of the vernacular that you wrote it in, but I am attempting and will do my very best to ask your question and get your answer tonight, because that's what this is about. So thank you again. Let's begin with who you are here to hear from, and that is the candidates themselves. I want them to each introduce themselves. And we'll start with Jack Pennings from the Green Party. Please say hello and introduce yourself, if you would.
Okay, thank you. I will say hello. It's my honor to be with you here tonight. My name is Jack Pennings, and I'm the candidate for the Green Party of Canada. What I'd like to do off the bat is thank the organizers for not yanking me at 7 o'clock this morning, as they did with Jonathan Pedno. I've lived in the riding for 22 years with my family near Michael Garron Hospital. We're very happy there. Professionally, I've worked in mobile security with BlackBerry for the last 18 years. Okay, this is a very historic election, probably the most so since 1988. I think so because I think over the course of the free trade area, we've become more complacent as a country, and we've been caught off guard now with Trumpism 2.0. Canada now has to become more bold, outward-looking, united, resilient, and the list goes on, and we need to move quickly on all of them. As the Green candidate, I must remind you of that other existential crisis, namely climate change. It's taken a back seat in this election, but it's not going away. In fact, the year 2030 is on the horizon. It is an important milestone year for various targets, especially carbon reduction targets. But now on Monday, if there's a majority result, guess what? Get ready. We have to get ready to meet our 2030 government. With 2030 in sight, it's been troubling to hear so much talk in the election about raising fossil fuel production. It seems to me like a knee-jerk response to Trump. Instead, we should be giving the highest priority to measures that both protect the environment and help build a better country at the same time. That, to me, is the sweet spot. It is possible, and the Green Party platform has many such ideas, some of which we'll be talking about shortly. Do we have more time?
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I would have welcomed the communist candidate, by the way. I'm sure she would have had some valid and important sites to share with us. Okay.
Thanks, Jack.
When we're talking, I think they're... Yeah, okay.
I seem to have lost the mic, but nevertheless, I will ask the candidates. Yeah, there we are, back. I will ask candidates to stand when speaking, so thank you for that. Nate, go ahead.
So, first, just thank you to everyone for being here, and special thanks. I've only had the privilege to serve this community for the last 10 years because of the trust that so many of you have put in me, and I just want to say sincerely thank you for that, because I think politics is the most important way we make a difference, and I've tried my best to do so over the last 10 years, and I hope to have the opportunity to do so again. And I'm really here for 3 reasons, and the first is, and Jack mentioned, I mean, this is a strange election. It's a really important election. It's a really consequential election. Just an hour ago, Donald Trump yet again said, oh, he might increase auto tariffs on Canada. It's every other day we're subjected to a new threat from our otherwise long-standing ally. The most important country to Canada is now someone we can no longer rely upon. And we need to make sure that we have serious leadership in the Prime Minister to make sure we defend our country and we build this country up in the best possible way. And when you think of the core options in this election, I actually don't think the choice is a particularly hard one. When you think of the national leadership and the choice between, you've got Mark Carney on the one hand, who has experience managing through crises, and a wealth of experience in doing so. And on the other hand, you have someone who, look, I've sat on committee with Pierre Poilievre, and he treats politics like a game. And I think, as I said, politics is a really important profession, but you got to treat it with the seriousness that it deserves, and that's not what I've seen from Pierre Poilievre in the time that I've certainly been in Parliament with him. Second reason I'm here is to protect our progress. And I don't want to tell you it's been perfect progress over 10 years, but there are 400,000 kids that aren't in poverty today because of the Canada Child Benefit. When you talk to young people in our community, they're saving $10,000 a year on childcare. $10,000 a year in licensed childcare. You've got, when we took office in 2015, there were communities all across this country, First Nations communities, that did not have clean water. Over 85% of the long-term advisories that existed when we took office have now been lifted, and there's water projects in every single community in need at different stages. And I could run down the list. Jack rightly mentions the importance of climate action. For the first time in this country's history, we've seen growth decoupled from emissions, where emissions have started to stabilize and go down, and yet we still see economic growth. Are we where we need to be? No, but we've come a very, very long way. And we need to protect the progress, and more importantly, we need to build upon that progress. The last reason I'm here is because I believe in strong local representation. I'm lucky to represent this community because I grew up here. I went to Beaumont and Malvern. My dad's here. My mom would be here, but she had an event on the other side of town, but they were both teachers in this community. I'm now raising my own family in this community, and I have done my best. Again, I would say there have been moments where if I could go back, I could say, oh, I wish I was more vocal on this and more vocal on that, but I can tell you I've done my best to work across party lines to push my own government, my own Liberal government, to be the best version of itself at every possible opportunity, and I look forward to maintaining that principled voice in Parliament at every opportunity if I can earn your trust yet again.
Thank you so much. Shannon.
Thank
Thank you, Alan. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shannon Devine, and I'm very proud to be running as your NDP candidate in Beaches East York. Thank you to event organizers and sponsors, Beach Metro and the Balmy Beach Residents Association. And of course, our moderator, Ellen Carter. And thank you all for being here tonight. For the last 18 years, I worked in the labor movement, leading campaigns for decent jobs, good wages and benefits, and safe and equitable workplaces. I have served as the executive director of the Ontario Federation of Labor, bringing together organizations from right across the province. I've also worked as the National Communications Director for the Canadian Auto Workers Union, and then Unifor, and now work at the United Steelworkers Union in my day job. And as you'll know, these are two of the leading organizations taking on the tariff fight for Canada. I have also long believed in collective action and the difference we can all make. I have a difference of opinion that politics is the only difference, the biggest difference we can make. I think there are many ways we can make a difference. And I have lived in the East End for a decade. My wife Natasha and I make our home here, along with our two daughters. Ella, who is 7, she goes to Beaumont, and Tegan, who is 17. I spend my time volunteering at the school whenever I can, and I've also volunteered and been on the boards of a number of organizations across the city, including food banks, social equity groups, and arts organizations, and I've also written in the Toronto Star. I'm running to be your MP because I believe in working together to win changes so that everyone who lives here can thrive here, and that just isn't the case right now. Frankly, I also believe we can expect more from our politicians. We can expect them to make choices to make Canadians' lives easier, to deal with the cost of living, the housing crisis, affordability, build good jobs, and actually tackle climate change and social and economic inequality. The NDP did this in the last Parliament. We pushed the Liberal government, who really wouldn't have done anything about a lot of these issues, to deliver for Canadians. The NDP won a national affordable childcare program for the first time, dental care, pharmacare, COVID benefits, and more. That is why I am so proud to run as a New Democrat, and I believe we are best served as a nation when we elect more New Democrats. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our candidates for their introductions. We'll begin with some questions. I'll pose a single question and we'll move across the table. Each will get a chance to answer. And then, depending on how we go, we might open it up to sort of a more general discussion about that topic for about another minute or so afterwards. So let's begin with what consistently has been polled as the #1 issue for Canadians in this federal election, and that is Canada-US relations. It is quickly followed by affordability, which we will get to. But Canada-US relations has dominated the headlines throughout this campaign. So my question to each of you is, why is your party best to represent Canada's interests when dealing with the United States? And specifically on the local level, what will you do to assist people who may be impacted by the tariffs, by the trade war? We know that more than half of businesses in this city either export or import. They have some dealing with the United States. So how will you personally help employers and employees who may be impacted by those tariffs? And Shannon, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Alan. As I've been canvassing in the riding, I have noticed that so many of us, okay, yes, I will stand up. So many of us are very proud of our country. We are putting up the Canada flag in our windows, and this is palpable. But people are also very concerned, and that makes total sense. I think the NDP is the best party to tackle this issue because the NDP quite truly is the party that comes up with solutions for people. The best solutions are always NDP solutions. Thank you. There are We are hearing a lot right now about the jobs that could be lost because of the tariffs. That's approximately 2 million jobs. A friend and a longtime colleague, economist Jim Stanford, has been talking about, he is the director of the Center for Future Work, and he has said that 80% of our GDP actually does not cross our borders. So that's a pretty astonishing figure, isn't it? And so what that means is we have to be investing more in infrastructure, more in services, more in healthcare, more in housing. All of those things are what is going to keep our economy going at this very difficult time. I also want to say that we need to make major changes to the EI program. This has been a long-standing issue. We need to lower the qualifying hours to 360 hours, and then also extend it to 50 weeks, and set the minimum weekly amount to $450 so that people can survive on EI. This is a long-standing problem, one that the Liberals did nothing about over the last 10 years. It's not a new problem.
So first, the question of which party or and which leader is best placed to manage. I intimated this at the outset. There we go. All right. So the first bit around who is best placed to stand up to Donald Trump, and I think I could point to the fact that we dealt with Donald Trump quite successfully in his first presidency, but I would add that under Carney, and I intimated this in my opening remarks, but you have someone who was the Bank of Canada governor when we went through the Great Recession, and the then Conservative Finance Minister Jim Flaherty called him an invaluable support. You have someone who helped Brexit, or who helped Britain manage through Brexit, warned about the consequences of Brexit, but then as the Bank of England governor, was actually the following day when the markets were unsettled, when folks in Britain were unsettled, he was the first voice they heard from and helped the country manage through the worst of it. And so when it comes to who's best placed to manage through a crisis, I would say let's look to someone who's got experience in helping countries manage through crises. The second thing I'll say, just in terms of the approach, you have to, one, fight, and you have to have a targeted response. You have to make sure that, and we've seen that, when you look at the retaliatory tariffs, they're targeted, they're thoughtful, and that is the right approach. You also have to make sure that you protect workers, and we have to make sure that the proceeds, the revenue from the tariffs that we levy, are put towards supporting those who are impacted in the most acute way by this crisis. And then the third piece is about resilience for our economy, and it's about building this country up. And you've heard the leader talk about one economy, not 13. I'm sure we'll talk about housing more, but it's about building infrastructure, housing, and getting this country building things in a much more serious way. And locally, I will say, my job in the pandemic was supporting businesses every step of the way, supporting individuals affected every step of the way. That's what I did, and that's exactly what I plan to do it again.
Sorry. Okay, I'll take the second part of the question first. What will the party do in order to support businesses and workers that are affected? It sounds like the parties are in basic agreement that we want to flow through counter-tariff money directly to workers for joblessness support. We also have it in our platform to expand EI eligibility, raising the minimum floor and also raising the maximum amount. In terms of what does our party bring, I would say our party brings a tradition of democracy, and the best way to fight authoritarianism abroad is with more democracy at home. We are probably the only party left that's going to argue for a proportional representational system. Sounds like I don't need to tell you what the problems are with with first past the post. We wish to convene a citizens' assembly in order to bring it about with binding recommendations. It's not foolproof. There will be pros and cons that need to be explored. Also, I would say in our parliament, there's a need to cooperate. People need to put their differences aside in this parliament more than in any previous parliament and work together. Our leader, Elizabeth May, has a lot of respect. She's been recognized by the other parliamentarians in various forms, such as being named the Parliamentarian of the Year, hardest working parliamentarian, etc. Finally, I would say we need to combat misinformation and set up a national agency in order to do so. I see I'm running out of time. Thank you.
All right, thank you to our candidates, and that is such a big issue. We really could spend the rest of the evening talking about tariffs and the implications, but there are so many other issues, and many of them that you've written in about. I do want to move quickly to affordability because it is top of mind for many Canadians. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, has accused corporate Canada, specifically grocers and grocery chains, of gouging, of basically making money off of you, not because they need to, but because they can. And I guess my question for all three is, how would you help Canadians afford basics? Do you support some kind of government intervention in price fixing, if it's not that kind of an issue, but some kind of support issue for basics, whether it's groceries, electricity, and because I mentioned the NDP, I know you started the first time, but I should, I'll let Shannon, you go again first, because I mentioned the NDP.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So affordability, this is something that is very dear to me because I've been spending so much time talking to people. I am thinking of a woman who I knocked on her door. She is retired. She has a lovely home in East York. And she said that she did not imagine her retirement to be like this. She has difficulty every time she goes to the grocery store. And each time she goes, she buys a little bit less. And she is retired with a pension. This is very difficult, and I'm hearing a lot of stories like this. People just scraping by in a way that they never expected. So that's why the NDP would put a cap on grocery prices, particularly for essentials, and we would also look towards regulating the way that prices are set, because groceries are at an all-time, well, they're a 40-year high. So inflation is at a 40-year high when it comes to groceries. So it's not just your imagination that the prices are going up every time you do groceries. That is definitely my experience. I don't know if that's your experience as well. We would also remove the GST from groceries, heating, and cell phone bills. And we, in the last parliament, we were able to win dental care, which is now in effect for seniors over 60, 65 and up, and children 18 and under. And that we hope that will be rolled out to more age groups soon. That is already saving families $1,700 a year. We would also invest in affordable housing, which is critical. That is why people are being crunched. Food bank users right now are paying more than half of their overall income towards their housing. And so that is creating such a crunch for people. And it's especially bad in Beaches East York. So that is why this issue is very, very important to me, and I would be committed to doing something about it.
Hello. I think the most important area in terms of affordability is in housing. I suspect that we're going to get into that in another question or segment. The Green Party does not have specific interventions in pricing in its platform, nor does it have specific subsidies such as an electricity bill. subsidy, but there are a number of other aspects of affordability to challenge. For the families that are challenged, there's an item in the platform to add a quote end poverty supplement to the Canada Child Benefit, fully fund the Canada Disability Benefit and extend eligibility, automatic tax filing, which would reach out to people who do not file tax forms in the traditional way. They would be automatically eligible for the refunds they would receive through their taxes. $21 hour minimum federal wage indexed to inflation. Raise the federal income tax floor to $45,000. And PEI at this time is willing to pilot a basic sort of, what's the exact, guaranteed livable income project. And the Green Party supports engaging with that, formerly called basic income, I suppose. And lastly, for those receiving benefits, ensure that there are no clawbacks on the first $10,000 earned through employment income. Thank you.
Just start with grocers and the lack of competition. At the outset of the pandemic, many of you will remember that grocery stores all canceled bonus hero pay all at the same time. It was quite interesting, just the timing of it. And so I was on the industry committee at the time, and I brought a motion and hauled the CEOs in front of our committee, and it turned out they were all communicating actually about reducing low-income wages at the very same time. And as a consequence of that, the competition commissioner said, oh, the law wasn't strong enough, so he wasn't able to pursue it as much. And actually, we made recommendations out of that, and the law changed, and we criminalized wage fixing. And so I would say, one, it's an example of working across party lines in an important way. Dental care is another example, of course, on the affordability front of working across party lines. But I would say also is an example of the need for greater competition. And I would say I don't generally favor price fixing. I think price fixing, generally speaking, is a measure of last resort. It doesn't always work, and it's quite difficult for the governments to do effectively. But I will say income supports for those in the greatest need matched with more competition is what I would overwhelmingly favor. And when I was the chair of the All-Party Anti-Poverty Caucus for a number of years, I helped to advocate for increasing successfully the Canada Workers Benefit from $700 million to now more than $3 billion a year. We've seen, I mentioned the Canada Child Benefit in my opening remarks. The disability benefit is not enough, but it's an incredibly important first step, and we have to now fix the eligibility criteria so it's not based on the disability tax credit, but there's more to do. When you look down the list at different initiatives, from increasing GIS to childcare, we have delivered a number of affordability measures, and I know we're going to get to housing specifically, but I agree with Jack that the overwhelming concern when it comes to affordability, the grocery store matters, but housing is at the forefront.
Well, we've been mentioning housing a number of times, so that is exactly where we're going to go. And Nate, I'm going to come back to you on this. We did have a specific question from Beach United Church, asked specifically want to know about each party's pledge to increase nonprofit and co-op housing, but on a larger issue, and this is for all of you, what role should government play in affordable housing? Should the government be eliminating fees and red tape primarily, or should it become a builder?
There we go. So I actually don't accept the dichotomy because I think the answer is both, right? The government has to get out of the way so the market can build more supply, and that does mean reducing taxes. So we have a commitment to cut development charges in half on multi-unit residential builds. It means cutting red tape. There's, in the language of exclusionary zoning, we didn't make sure we have gentle density everywhere. We end exclusionary zoning. We have greater density near transit and post-secondary institutions. And so that's mostly a municipal issue and a provincial issue, but at the federal level, we have deals with $200 municipalities through a $4.5 billion fund called the Housing Accelerator Fund that rewards municipalities that cut red tape, that upzone, that speed up approval times, and then get more housing built. So yes, we got to get governments out of the way so we get more housing built. And in this election, you'll see Mark Carney talk a lot about it, and there's a $26 billion fund on the table for innovative home building and offsite construction and really driving down the cost of home building to empower the market. But if we just did that, we wouldn't succeed, because the market alone isn't going to deliver the affordability that we need. And in 2017, after decades of bipartisan neglect, we introduced and renewed a national housing strategy and reasserted a federal role in community non-market housing. But it was not at the scale to meet the scale of the challenge. And so subsequent to that, we now have a co-op housing development fund. It's $1.5 billion, $500 million in grants, and $1 billion in loans. Just before the election, we saw the first $80 million for 3 projects, the first co-op housing investment in 30 years. In this election, there's an additional $10 billion that's been committed for seniors housing, for student housing, and for housing for those in the greatest need. And we are going to continue to build on our efforts. And on the builder side, we are going to get the government back in the business of building affordable homes at a scale, especially on public land, at a scale we haven't seen since the Second World War.
Okay, great question. It is important to note that the cost of housing over the last 10 years has increased by 89%. Whose income here increased by 89%? Anyone? No, our incomes went up by 21% in that same period. And 76% of Canadians don't even own their homes, including half of the residents here in Beaches East York. So when we're talking about housing, we're talking about building affordable housing, we're talking about building more rentals. In the NDP plan, we would commit to 20% non-market housing. So that means co-ops, that means housing run by not-for-profits. That means supportive housing. I was in the last co-op built in Toronto, actually yesterday. It's at 10 Gower, and it was built by the NDP government here. It was the last one built in Toronto. Yeah, exactly. And so in nowhere did I hear rent control. So the NDP would require rent control, because without, yes, rent control. Do we remember rent control? We like it, right? Rent control. And so in order to make sure the housing stays affordable, we need to have rent control, absolutely. And we would also invest quite a bit in housing. This would be 2 different funds totaling $16 billion, not 60, $16 billion. And I also just want to flag the need for supportive housing so that people are not being pushed into long-term care. We have an amazing place in this riding called Tobias House, and it is at Danforth and Coxwell. And it is accessible apartments for people with disabilities. And so a lot of the residents there have wheelchairs. And they said I was one of the first people to ever be in that building in terms of politicians. So that was a pleasure.
Well, I guess here's what happens when you speak third. I find that there's, again, a lot of agreement between the parties in this area. I would say in terms of affordability, again, there's more, let's say, downside in terms of housing than there is in, let's say, tax reductions. Well, okay, I'm old enough to remember in 1990, well, I'm even older than that. I remember when we were taught that 30%, no more than 30% of your income should be spent on shelter. I don't think anybody's doing that now, and has not been for a long time. The other thing I was going to say, when the government got out of the housing business in 1990, was it 4, under Paul Martin, it was predictable that this was the trajectory our housing market was going to go on. So in terms of what the Green Party proposes, like Nate, it's both. There is some reduction of red tape, but also an emphasis on getting CMHC back into the business of housing, providing housing directly and building housing. Yeah, okay. I would just say the Green Party twist on this is that we will insist on various environmentally friendly measures, such as building within existing city limits, not creating more sprawl, insisting that new housing is all accessible and new housing is equipped with electric vehicle chargers. And also, one point I left out was that we need to build for climate resilience. We should not be building on floodplains especially, a lesson that we learned long ago in Toronto. Okay, that is my time. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates, and this is, of course, a very important file. Everything really touches on it, so let's kind of talk more about it. I will kind of maybe open it up to what you've heard from each other, and I would also like to throw in a plea for first-time home buyers, if we could address that too in your answers.
So I'll pick up on a couple of things that my colleagues here have said. Jack's focus on climate resilience in housing is incredibly important, and that's one area where offsite construction can play a really important role in driving down emissions. But we obviously don't just need to make sure we're retrofitting existing homes. When we're building new homes, we have to make sure they're resilient as well. And on rentals, which Shannon mentioned, which is incredibly important. Through the apartment construction loan programs, where it's the largest financing that we see, longer term, low interest financing, we're seeing builders move away from condo builders or commercial builders. They're moving towards building rentals, both because we've lifted GST off of rental construction, but also because we offer low cost financing. An example of this, in my short time as housing minister, my joke is I've been housing minister for 4 months and I've served under 2 prime ministers, and and in those short 4 months, I got a deal done with the city, both to unlock the waterfront 14,000 homes, 25% of which are going to be owned by the city and more affordable, but also $2.5 billion in that low-cost financing to get over 5,000 rentals built, again, many of which will be affordable. So there is a huge focus on affordable rentals. The only challenge, I think, and this would be a question for Shannon, rent control. One can agree with rent control, of course. Of course, we want to make sure there's security of tenure. Of course we do. I don't know how the federal government does it. It's done it twice in its history in a crisis, and the Constitution generally makes it a lot harder for the federal government to get involved directly in rent control. So I'd be curious how we expect the federal government to do that, because when we had a tenant Bill of Rights idea, it turned into more of a blueprint because of jurisdiction. And I just don't know how you get around that jurisdiction.
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question because we are grounding our solutions in people, not developers. So what that means practically is any funding that would be transferred to the provinces would be contingent upon rent control. So we can regulate. We can get back into the business of government actually regulating things. It is good to regulate things. We are going to regulate things. I'm sorry, I actually don't remember what the other question was. Oh, first time.
I didn't even answer it.
Oh, okay. You know what? First time home buyers. Yeah, that is obviously a very important area. I believe the party policy is to not have GST on the first time home buyers, which would be very helpful. The concern that has been raised, though, is that when there are changes for first-time home buyers, it does start to drive up, because they're not paying certain things, then it starts to drive up other things, which is really a concern. So we need to just make sure we're building a lot more homes and giving people a lot more options. And that's why I'm just going to bring it back to rent control always. Because people, if they are renting, they need to be able to save. It can't be as expensive as what it is now.
Okay, just to speak to the first-time home buyers question, it is in the Green Party's policy to waive HST for first-time home buyers as well. The Green Party, so any MPs elected would press for that. Also, in my opening remarks, I said that there's a sweet spot where building out our country and environmental goals can both be done at the same time. Housing is one such area. The Prime Minister is talking about building out modular homes at an unprecedented rate. It's a great idea, and it can be done with sustainable materials such as engineered wood, which would help with which would help our economy as well as building out more housing in a sustainable way. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. All right, so our previous topics were absolutely lightweight compared to our next one. We got a number of questions about the war in Gaza, and especially how it has impacted Canadian society. Now, I will just say at the outset, and I think we all realize that this is an issue that inflames passions, that people are extraordinarily passionate about. And I would just caution, as we discuss this, that we keep an open mind and we let the candidates speak. I really would just ask that we are respectful of various points of view as we talk about what is a very challenging subject. And Jack, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask just simply two questions, and they really come from the questions that we got through the newspaper, and they kind of go two ways, and I think they're interesting. One, what will you do to confront and combat growing anti-Semitism in this country? And two, do you uphold the right for people to peacefully advocate for the Palestinian people?
Yes, do I uphold the right to peacefully advocate? Yes, of course, as long as it remains peaceful. On the subject of what's happened domestically, unquestionably, the current climate has given rise to more anti-Semitism. I believe it's now 2 hate crimes which are reported per day, which are anti-Semitic, and anti-Semitic incidents make up the majority of hate crimes that are reported. It's a major problem. It touches on me personally, as I have someone very close to me who works at a Hebrew school, and as we know, one Hebrew school in Toronto was shot at 3 times. What the party would do would be to strengthen hate laws, although this specifically is not mentioned in the party platform. What was the other question? I'm sorry. Would you address both? Oh, okay.
You got it.
All right. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks.
So first on the question of anti-Semitism, and I would say all kinds of hate, of course, we have to call out, but especially when you've seen an increase in anti-Semitism, and you can point to examples of graffiti we've seen locally. You can point to examples of there was a brick thrown through the Beach Hebrew Institute, and I think it's especially important not just to call out existing examples, but also, in this particular community, when you have sort of a history of anti-Semitism down at the Balmy Beach Club, for example, I think it's just important to be incredibly vocal and stand with the Jewish community. I will say, also, to your second question, we have to make sure that when we have that conversation, it's a thoughtful one, and that we are not calling people out for human rights-based advocacy and trying to silence them. And so, and this is obviously fraught, right? We've seen this fraught. I've lived this in politics. It can be a very fraught conversation where you see, 2 traumas almost. You have October 7th and people feeling that trauma, and then you have people feeling an incredible trauma from continued violence, indiscriminate violence against the Palestinian people by the Netanyahu government. And so I do think oftentimes in these conversations we talk past each other, and I don't know why it is so hard in this country that we say we're going to call out hate and we're going to make sure people feel safe and protected here at home, and we're also going to stand for human rights, and we're going to stand up for Palestinian human rights and all human rights abroad. We should be able to do both.
Thank you. And I just also want to thank my two colleagues here for their very thoughtful comments. I found them to be quite good. I want to say that in terms of addressing anti-Semitism or any hate, no one should feel fearful to be walking down the street, to go to school, to send their children to school. This is a very challenging moment that we're living through, and there are many communities that are feeling this deeply. So I am with them, and the NDP will always stand against hate with any group. And that said, I do fully support the right to peaceful assembly as outlined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are, as Canadians, we do have that right, and that is very important, and we need to hold that dear. So certainly, I would always stand up for that right, and the NDP has been the party to lead the parliamentary work in support of Palestine, and it is the party who has called what is happening in Gaza a genocide. So, and while individual members have done advocacy, I do think it's important to recognize that the NDP is the party who has said that and has recognized that 61,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. So I just want to make sure that we all are operating with the same information. Thank you.
Thank you to all our candidates. Well said. That was tremendous. Thank you, and appreciate that. But we're not. Perhaps at another moment we'll be able to take questions. But it's.
Truly, we stopped it at Cosburn.
Yeah.
And what, all we did was, we put on the flagpole the United Nations flag. That said, every culture was represented here, and we're working.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone on that. Let's move to the environment, which is, of course, an extraordinarily big issue. And I want to talk about it in terms of the particular moment we're facing in this country. Right now, there is a rethinking of Canadian energy policy and our dependence on the United States as an export market for our energy. Some of this is centered on pipelines, some of it has centered on other forms. To you, what I want to know is where, and importantly, how do we draw the line between environmental protection, red tape, and the very real economic need to export our resources? Nate, I'll start with you.
So there are competing interests here, and that's the challenge to politics sometimes, is you have important interests, but they don't always align. And so in this case, for example, on energy, it's a situation where we want to make sure we have energy independence and resilience, and our longstanding ally is no longer the longstanding trustworthy ally. You also have to make sure that you're thinking much further ahead, and that the resilience you're building is not short-term resilience, but it's long-term resilience, and you're making sure that you have, so you might think, you'll conservatives say pipeline, drill, baby, drill, sort of pipeline, but when you think of the long-term solution, it is going to be taking the energy transition seriously in the medium to long term, and it is also making sure that we have an east-west transmission grid and making sure there are connections there, and that's the kind of, I think, infrastructure building we need to see. But you do see in the short term, so long as Canada relies upon, and the world relies upon fossil fuels, and it's a huge part of particular parts of our economy in this country. There will be a push to say, can we get more of this kind of infrastructure built? I would say everything should be on the table, but I worry about just the time horizons and the costs to say, how much are we going to invest in something like that? How long is it going to take? And by the time we wake up and it's built, is it going to be the kind of infrastructure that we need for the kind of energy independence that we want and the kind of world that we're living in? And the last thing I'll say is just around First Nations and Indigenous communities, because you've got Doug Ford that hops on a bulldozer and says we're going to the Ring of Fire, and it makes it a lot harder to see through and realize the value and opportunity in critical minerals if you don't take First Nations rights seriously. When you have Pierre Poilievre who says we're going to get it done if we want to realize the economic and environmental and clean energy opportunities here, it has to be a partnership with First Nations communities.
Thank you. Mr. Carney has been talking about making Canada an energy superpower, but he's talking about both conventional and clean energy. The Green Party wants to not construct pipelines, mostly for the reasons given by Nate, and move toward a national electricity grid. We need to do it anyway for carbon reduction reasons, so let's do it now. Just in terms of timelines, the Green Party, we're not talking about shutting her down tomorrow. 2035 is the target to move to a completely end-to-end renewable grid. 2045 is the goal to phase out fossil fuel production. And also something that needs to be done. Around the time that they started to construct the TMX pipeline, there was talk of a just transition for oil industry workers. I think it's been kind of laughed out of the room by the folks in Alberta, but the Green Party is not letting this idea go. If we are going to be responsible to oil workers, we need to give them an alternative, and there are alternatives. They can help in something else, which is maybe will come up under defense. There's something called a national infrastructure, makes up part of a national civil defense corps that the Green Party proposes. Oil workers are ideally suited to clean up the abandoned oil wells which litter the West. I think I'll just end it there. I'll point out though that the little known fact, it's talked about, the oil patch is talked about as a national asset, but it is in fact majority American owned. Okay, red sign is up. Thanks.
Thank you. The NDP would end subsidies for profitable oil and gas companies that the Liberal government is currently doling out. We would also invest in retrofitting millions of homes. We have a new policy, Buy Canadian, Build Canadian, Buy Canadian, and it focuses on local procurement. And the reason for that is it's good to invest in local jobs, of course, but local materials are often more sustainable. They have lower emissions, and there's obviously less transportation related to them. We would accelerate the clean energy transition, and we worked to push for the Sustainable Jobs Act, which was adopted in the last parliament. And that means that workers will also be included in the transition. And that is so important because we can't transition the economy when we are getting so much pushback from working people. It just will not happen. As Jack mentioned in Alberta, the plan being laughed out of the province, we can't have that. So we need to make sure that we're building support for new solutions. I also just want to add that currently Canada has the worst environmental record of any of the G7 nations. So it's not going great. We need to work on this a little bit more. And then any of our development would also include the prior free and informed consent of First Nations communities, which is very, very important, and that hasn't always been the case.
Thanks. There's a lot there. There's a lot there to talk about. So let's maybe just kind of kick it around a little bit. Maybe Nate, I'll just kind of, if you don't mind, take off something that you said. You said everything's on the table, and if I can devil's advocate that for a moment, that to a lot of Canadians sounds like pipelines. It sounds like we don't know what that means. And the devil's advocate also might say that also doesn't sound like removing the red tape that needs to happen to be able to get development done. How do we do those two things? How do we get development done, and how do we protect the environment? I know that's kind of the question I asked before, but if I could go around real quick on that.
Okay, so an example of speeding things up. You had, in one of his first acts, you had the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, sit down with premiers and say, how are we going to make sure there is one review for different projects to make sure we're speeding things up? So there are ways of aligning federal and provincial rules. There are ways of making sure we're all on the same page to make sure big infrastructure projects, which we don't have in this country a great track record at building big things, certainly not on time and under budget. And we could talk about public transit too. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity for collaboration in this moment, in this Build Canada, Buy Canada moment, for alignment across party lines and across jurisdictions. Why I say everything's on the table is because that is, I'll use an example. You've got oil that's transported from Alberta to Ontario, and it goes through a pipeline through the United States. Now, I think if you were looking at this from a strategic perspective, you would say, well, in the short term, we're still relying on oil. We want to make sure we are moving investments to the east-west transmission grid. We are moving investments to become a clean energy superpower. That is the overriding focus in the medium to long term for our economic and environmental security. But in the short term, does it make sense to make sure that we actually have more energy independence in the short term when it relates to fossil fuels? And the answer might be yes. The answer might be this is too costly to build, and as a matter of opportunity cost, it actually doesn't make sense. And I think it's constructive not to say no to everything off the bat, but to say let's look at things, different projects, put everything on the table, and what is, as a matter of opportunity cost, best for this country and in this country's interest as it relates to energy security and independence, but also becoming the clean energy superpower that we need to become. And I'll just say on a personal note, as I think you can tell by the way I'm talking about this, I don't think the math is likely to add up because the time horizon on getting pipelines built will be very long. We've seen this already in this country. And so I'm skeptical. Color me skeptical on whether that makes sense. And if I had $1 to spend, it would be focused on clean energy and building up clean energy and focusing on succeeding in the energy transition that's going to happen with or without us.
Okay, thank you. To follow up on that, again, we would need to end the subsidies for profitable oil and gas companies. We have been supportive of the corporate carbon tax, and the reason for that is we have to make big polluters pay. And so we want to be investing more in renewables. That is the future. We don't need to be subsidizing big oil. We just don't. As I mentioned, I work at the United Steelworkers Union, and we have a facility in Regina that produces the pipes. And so that is a real conundrum, right? It's a real conundrum representing people who support the pipeline because their jobs are dependent on it. But as a union and as a country, we are moving towards the understanding that we need to evolve and there will be a transition. And so we need to start that now because we are at risk of leaving a lot of people behind if we don't get going.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of points because I think the important points are being made. In terms of building an east to west pipeline, I don't think the economics make sense, as Nate was saying. First of all, there's no private company anywhere that's expressed interest in building such a thing. By the time we build it, there may not be a market for Canadian oil. I mean, just because we build it doesn't mean people want to buy it. I had something else to say. Okay, I'll just leave. There are actually some cool things that the government could get behind. One really cool idea I like is that of deep geothermal. Like, we're familiar with small scale geothermal, like on a sort of neighborhood scale, but they've started in Alberta with some piloting of deep geothermal, and that means geothermal at scale. It means going way, way deep into the earth in order to produce electricity from the heat on a large, large scale. Okay, and there's an example. There's a lot more that we can do. That's what I wish to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you, candidates, and thank you for indulging me in those two questions. This one is kind of related, but is very hyper-local. When we start talking about federal politicians, you know, I think all issues are local at some point. So Glen Stewart Ravine, as you know, there is a development proposal. You may know this. The local community group is not particularly happy about it. It seems like it's now gone back before some kind of review. The question is not about that development per se, because let's face it, you're vying for a federal position. But the question to you is, as a federal representative, how will you lend your voice to local development issues like this one? Shannon, I'll start with you.
I think local democracy is just so important, and I've spoken to so many people in the last little while, and certain demographics don't feel like they're being heard, and that's important because we need to be taking all the voices to Ottawa with us, right? That's the job. And so in terms of the local development issues, I think as a sitting representative, we have the ability to pull together many different groups, and we can pull together different levels of government. We have a lot of levers at our disposal, and I am nothing if not collaborative. I always try to source the best opinions, best information, so that we can come to the best conclusion. And that is ultimately, I think, the role of any elected official. It's not to have all the answers, it's to find the answers, it's to facilitate the answers, and that's what I would be committed to.
Well, as an example of local action or self-help action on a larger scale, I would cite the Buy Canada movement. It's just a fantastic thing that's taken off among our citizens. And speaking of sovereignty, there's nothing that Donald Trump can do to stop such things. But the Green Party would support local democracy. It's just important in order to have well-informed policy in Parliament and at the higher levels, to go to have it based in ideas that have come from the grassroots. You'll see that strung throughout the Green Party platform. Thanks.
So at the federal level, there are many ways that one can be an advocate for environmental action. And in the course of the last 10 years, I have seen my role in many ways to push the party and the government to be more ambitious when it comes to climate action. So when it comes to introducing legislation that ultimately helped to inform the Climate Accountability Act and more ambition through that, making sure that there was more accountability to Parliament and Canadians and ongoing reporting to Parliament and Canadians in terms of our progress, making sure that on nature protection, which then you do see partnerships with municipalities. So we've put funding into the Toronto Ravine Strategy, for example, is through a nature protection fund and natural infrastructure fund. We've seen dollars come into this community, but all across the south end into the city through the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, over $30 million to make sure we're protecting our waterfront all across the city, including in our community. So you can be an advocate for this community specifically and for our city, but I think overwhelmingly, the advocacy has to take the views of constituents, including here all across our community, and then channel that in Parliament on federal issues. So when it comes to a specific project like the one you mentioned, I think the most important involvement, look, if Doug Ford wants to build on the Greenbelt, I'll stand with Mary Margaret and push back against that kind of action. But if there's a, sure, but if there are competing interests and they're very hyper-local when it comes to ecological considerations versus housing considerations, look, I don't think it is the role of a federal representative to get in the weeds of a proposal like that. I think if anything, it is to say, if community concerns are being raised with me, it is to make sure that they're directed in the right place for the representatives and to make sure that the voice is being heard by the right representative that has that appropriate jurisdiction. Because you can't be doing everything all at once on every, and you got to prioritize, and you got to really lean into the federal level and the federal issues and advocacy around climate.
Thank you so much. Let's move to immigration. I think we all accept that diversity is our strength, and we know that this country has been built by immigrants, and successive waves of people from all around the world have come here and made this country their home and have built this country. But recently there has been a discussion over the level of immigration, and specifically whether or not the country is prepared in terms of the very real things that we have in place to be able to accept immigrants and ensure that they succeed. So my question, and perhaps Jack, I'll start with you, is how do we effectively tie immigration levels to available infrastructure and necessary supports so that we know that we are not creating an unnecessary and unwarranted backlash, and we are ensuring that people coming to this nation can succeed?
Okay, thank you. Oh, now it's my turn. There we go. The main point to make on immigration is that it needs to be responsible. We can bring people to this country, but there needs to be sufficient housing and sufficient programs for new Canadians to launch themselves into our society. We went too far when we started to bring in numbers approaching 500,000 per year into the situation that we have now, especially in our housing market. One example I heard recently from another Green candidate was that working across parties, he worked with the immigration minister to insist that young people who were coming here could demonstrate that they had sufficient money available to them so that they would not be caught off guard and be desperate, like right from the get-go, possibly falling into exploitative situations. So that's the main point I would like to make, that we need to welcome immigrants, obviously. Our mosaic style of pluralism makes us distinct from the United States. It's a model that I think we can all be proud of, but it needs to be done responsibly. Thanks.
Okay, so at a high level, population growth has to go hand in hand with infrastructure and housing availability. And so the question becomes, how do you do that? And I think as a starting point, it's about making sure that there are shared plans when you have provinces and municipalities that are responsible for getting housing built in conjunction and partnership with the federal government. And we're clocking at about 240,000 housing starts a year. CMHC will tell us, we need to double that over the next 10 years, okay? And I'll get to this, because when they say we need to double it, it's based on the reduction in planned immigration levels that we have undertaken over the last year. Now, the partnership is important, making sure immigration minister sits down with housing minister, make sure they're sitting down with provincial ministers, and there is that collaboration on a shared plan for growth. That's incredibly important. We also make sure we're counting the right things. So we have seen, look, immigration is massively important to this country, especially when it comes to permanent levels of immigration. And permanent levels, you should know, mostly we are talking principally economic class immigration, which is incredibly important. We're talking about family reunification, and we're talking about Canada remains a world leader in resettling and welcoming refugees, and I think that's a very important thing in terms of our humanitarian obligations to the world. Now, there's also temporary immigration, and that became incredibly unsustainable when you think of the marriage of infrastructure and population growth. And I'll use an example. Algoma University went from 900 international students to 9,000 international students over a matter of only a few years. And it's not the same all across this country. Ontario was a particularly bad actor, and if I was pointing blame in the federal direction, and Mark Miller, the previous minister, took serious action to get this to a better place. But we didn't act quickly enough to police what was happening at the provincial level with colleges, universities, where they were balancing their books on the backs of international students. And I don't wish reading Hansard on any of you, but if you were to read Hansard from April 2022, I was also quite critical of the federal government and its sort of embrace of temporary foreign workers and just, I think just increasing that too much. And so we are now in a place where it's sustainable. We just have to make sure it continues to be sustainable.
The immigration question is an interesting one because for 10 years, the federal government did nothing about the housing crisis, and then all of a sudden it was the problem of international students. And so that's how that went. And right now in Beaches East York, we actually have a number of diaspora populations who feel like they've been potentially offered a fake bill of goods, really, when it comes to coming to Canada. I was at an event for International Women's Day, SARO. It's the South Asian Women's Rights Organization. It's an amazing organization working here and in Scarborough. And I met two female doctors from Bangladesh. One had worked in the Ukraine for 30 years as a doctor. She is here now. She's here because of the war in the Ukraine. And she works at Dollarama. This is when 6.5 million Canadians do not have a family doctor. And then another one worked in Bangladesh for 21 years as a doctor, and she works the night shift doing cleaning. And so the NDP would make sure to offer more residency programs for foreign-trained doctors to help us both on the front of employment, but also deal with our medical shortage, our medical staff shortage in Canada. So the immigration numbers very much need to match the services, and presently they don't, and they haven't for a very, very long time. The government has been more concerned about looking like they're doing the right thing instead of actually doing the right thing for people, and that has to change.
It's an interesting topic. We'll let a little discussion, minute each, to candidates to talk about it again.
So a couple things. One, just the idea that the government has done nothing over 10 years on housing, right? I mean, look, it's gotten, it's much more challenging post-pandemic, and in part because we have seen population growth that has outpaced housing and infrastructure. But when you look at 2017, the reassertion of a federal role through the National Housing Strategy, a good first step. Since that time, you've seen $14 billion through the Affordable Housing Fund for community housing. You've seen over $50 billion for long-term low-interest financing for rental construction. You've seen $1.5 billion for a co-op housing development fund. You've seen $1.5 billion for a rental protection fund because we know we are losing affordable housing more quickly than we're able to build it. And so, look, again, it's not perfect progress. Of course, we can and should do more, which is why, over the last 4 months, I've been trying to get us to do more. And in this election platform, we are committed to the most ambitious plan on housing. And if you see, independent organizations that assess housing plans, they'll point to the Liberals and say it scores the highest marks, and for good reason, because it's the most ambitious plan we've seen since World War II, in having a reassertion of the federal role to get things built in a much more serious way, especially on public land. And on immigration, I'll just say, because I mentioned criticizing the government, I think we listened to the business community on temporary foreign workers, and that's now been adjusted. You saw partnerships, public colleges and private college partnerships where we saw too many international students coming. International students contribute an incredible amount to this country on an individual level. Of course they do. At a macro level, it was not sustainable. And so we've taken action to correct that. You've seen permanent levels go from 500,000 down to now below 400,000 on a going forward basis. So the idea that nothing has happened, there's been no action, I think is simply false. Now, the question is, how much more action do we need? And we need a lot more housing action, and that's exactly what we are going to deliver.
My apologies. It's just been an inadequate action. So as I mentioned earlier, the cost of housing has gone up by 89%, and real wages have gone up by 21%. So there is a huge gap there. So I don't think that we can say that it's been adequate at all. It's been far from adequate, and people in our area are suffering. Renters are suffering. Homeowners are suffering. In Crescent Town, where I've been spending some time, I have talked to folks who are newcomers, and they are Uber drivers. So how many people here like to order Uber, right? Sometimes you order dinner from Uber. It does happen. And they are Uber drivers, and they are living 6 drivers to a 1-bedroom apartment because that's what they can afford. So in the jobs market that we're in, it is very difficult for people to find meaningful work, and we need to make sure that people are being supported if they're being brought into the country, because we're bringing them in with the promise of something, right? They're leaving their loved ones behind. They are selling their belongings, and they are selling whatever homes they have, and it is hard to come here, and then if you have nothing once you're here, it is then hard to go back home to nothing. So that's just something that we need to consider when we're thinking about immigration.
I've got just a couple of thoughts. Being in the tech industry, I work with a lot of very skilled immigrants, and some of them have really opened my eyes to conditions in their home country and about adapting to life here. They fit in amazingly, but they come here as skilled workers. One thing we haven't talked about is the possibility of increased immigration from that fascist land to the south. One, refugees. We could see it in the election campaign. It was, I think, foreseeable that refugees are going to come here from America. The other thing is, what about, I read a very interesting article not that long ago about 3 top academics in the area of fascism who have moved to Toronto. I guess they see it for what it is, and they've gotten out of Dodge already. I mean, one of them was from Yale, who in the right mind leaves a job at Yale, but nonetheless, they see fascism on the rise, and here they are. Nobody's talking about it, but I wonder if we can foresee increased immigration from the US, either at the refugee level or maybe the immigrants that we would really like to get, skilled people who will fit in very easily into this country.
Just real quick, maybe not real quick.
Medium quick.
I was just going to say real quick, so not that everyone is going to read the 67 pages of the platform, but there is a $100 million commitment to identify and then help academics in the U.S. relocate and make sure we're attracting talent in this particular moment. And there's also $500 million it is a provincial area of responsibility principally, but there's $500 million on the table to make sure we're expanding residencies for foreign trained doctors as well.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Well, this concludes the question portion of our evening, and we'll now throw it back to our candidates for some closing remarks, and then we're going to wrap up our evening. You'll have an opportunity to meet the candidates and perhaps ask a question if you didn't get the answer that you were looking for tonight. So, Jack, we'll start with you with wrap-up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was fast. I want to talk a little bit about the fate of the carbon tax, because the carbon tax, frustration with the carbon tax is what drove me to the Green Party. I really can't, I really couldn't take it, what I saw going on. And what I saw going on was politics trumping smart environmental policy. It was good of the Liberals to introduce it, but then they mishandled it. Pierre Poilievre has sabotaged it. And all of the three parties, when the opportunity came, dropped it like a hot potato. Now, no matter what you think of the carbon tax, insert your favorite environmental policy there and try to convince me that it won't meet, that there isn't a risk that it will meet the same kind of fate. So a green vote is your clearest signal possible that you take the environment seriously as we approach the year 2030. And so for this reason alone, I think it's worth considering voting green. On another level, you can be the judge of this, but I think that in this riding in particular, the incumbent will be reelected, and therefore that frees you up to vote with your... Come on, Nate. In fact, I think Nate wants people to vote green. And the reason for that is that we can send him back to Ottawa with a big fat green mandate. Well, in short, if you wish one way or another to ensure that green policies are kept at the forefront, please consider voting green. Thank you.
If you want green policy at the forefront, you could also vote for me, I'm just saying. Look, this has been great. I have not actually had an opportunity to speak at great length with Shannon and Jack, so I've really appreciated this. I want to tell you a story to close, okay? So there's a young woman in the riding. She voted, I hope for me, this very first time. This is the first opportunity to vote, but I met her when she was 13. She was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 3. She went through 841 days of chemotherapy. Her name's Helena, and she beat it. And she came to me a number of years ago and said, you know, I want funding for pediatric cancer research, and I want to save my friends. My friends are dying. And I was like, Helena, this is a very powerful story, but we need a proposal. We need a proposal that I need to be able to take to the government and find a way to get it funded. She comes back a number of months later with a proposal for $30 million signed by 30 pediatric oncologists and cancer care organizations. And I was like, okay, you've done your work, Helena. It's now time for me to do my job. And I, initially unsuccessful through the finance minister at the time, Minister Morneau, I then had worked with 2 colleagues specifically who had similar stories in their own ridings. We had over 80 colleagues sign on to a letter. We got it in platform, we got it in a budget, and that was the $30 million for pediatric cancer research. And I tell you that story because it's the power of local representation and being able to work within a party to push the party to be the best version of itself. And I can tell you many more stories of the opportunities that I've had to make a difference because, as I say, of the trust that you've put in me, and I hope to make that much more of a difference if I get another opportunity over the next 4 years.
First of all, I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I've spent the last many weeks in particular, but really the last many years and years, speaking to members of our community. And from what I've heard tonight and on the doorsteps and when I've been invited into people's homes, I know that people are concerned. We are proud of our country and we want the best of it to stay intact. Things like universal health care, unemployment insurance, and now dental care, pharmacare, and universal affordable child care. These are all NDP ideas. And over many years, the NDP has worked hard to push the Liberal governments, many governments, to make these things a reality. And citizens are also frustrated at the ways that politicians have taken them for granted and not acted in their best interest. That was a very nice story, though. Too many, no, it was a very nice story. No, I mean it, I genuinely mean it. I wasn't trying to be. I can be a little cutting at times. My wife has told this to me. But I really did mean that was a nice story, truly. Too many people do feel left behind right now in one way or another. Students are struggling to find summer jobs or jobs after graduating. People are looking, and they're looking at bleak prospects. Families who are feeling so squeezed, even people with good paying jobs. I've talked to a lot of them. I've spoken to many seniors who feel like they are not being considered, and I know that better is possible. This is why I'm running as a New Democrat to be your next MP. Canadian values are NDP values, the values of taking care of each other and doing what we can to make life better. And I just want to say that under former banker Mark Carney, the Liberal Party is becoming more conservative. So we are not confident that we will keep all these gains. And we need New Democrats in Parliament to push a progressive agenda so that Canadians do not get left behind when they need their government the most. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much to our candidates. Thank you to Beach Metro. Thank you to the Balmy Beach Residents Association. But most of all, thank you to you. Please remember to vote. Thank you. Have a good night.